This is Evie.
This is Alissa.
This is Chelsea.
And this is Caroline.
Welcome to Med Surg Moments, the AMSN podcast.
This podcast is an engaging look at the lives of and surrounding medical surgical nurses.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Med Surg Moments. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Great.
All
Awesome.
good in Florida, the vaccine capital of the world, it seems. We have given lots and lots of them in the last month, which is a wonderful thing, but it just made life a little hectic. But it's a wonderful thing to be able to give people that protection. So all good down here.
How about you, Alissa? How have you been doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I actually just did a call for healthcare workers to volunteer to do vaccine rollout to the community because we're just barely getting to that part. I just filled out my volunteer forms to see if I am up to snuff to vaccinate my community. And
Not sure about that.
We'll see. I'm vaccinating my coworkers. So apparently my employer thinks I'm up to snuff. So that's good. And then just personally, I think I'm fighting a kidney stone. So
no.
Yeah. Other than that.
Ouch. Ooh.
Yeah. So if I seem just a little more mellow than normal, that's probably why. Just, haven't been feeling super great. No, nothing. Unfortunately, it just pain makes me just a little more quiet than usual.
Yeah. Very painful. I'm sorry. I hope that this too shall pass. There you go.
All righty. What's new with you?
Oh, wow. Perfect timing because what's new is life is just busy, but I am actually working. So I had to step away. And so if I do drop off, that'll be the reason why, because I have patients coming and people knocking on the door. So I am talking about hectic. I am literally in the middle of hectic.
Yeah, sometimes being busy is good to a point, isn't it? And then we think, okay, it's just time to take a minute, recharge, take a moment, and just come up for air. I know, it's hard, very hard. But I'm
doing good. Things are going well. Just busy life, up and down, and we're just trudging through.
It's great that we're all together. It seems like
very much so.
4 of us have been together. So
yes,
it's always good.
It has been a while. It's so good to see all of you. I shared with you guys previously that I'm into options trading now. So I've been doing that since October. And just before I hopped on the call, I was doing some trading homework, looking at a couple of different tickers to get comfortable trading independently and things like that. I'm not going to go into that. It's a whole nerdy spiel. But
I must have missed that conversation.
I know what you're talking about.
I know what you're talking about. I just missed the conversation.
Is there some English in there? What are you?
Were you part of the GameStop thing?
I did not jump into the GameStop shenanigans. I wish I would have. That would have been a nice chunk of change. But I have been pretty adamant about learning how to trade independently. I'm in a little investment group and they give us homework throughout the week. So it's nice. Cool. It's good reinforcement. And I'm just totally been nerding out on learning how to trade options. And I'm also into, I don't know if any of our listeners, you guys have heard of this, but it's called NBA Top Shot. And you can own player moments. And it's like a cryptocurrency, but for basketball. And that's something that's been upcoming. So I'm into a little bit of everything in the finance world right now.
Good for you. That's
it's been
awesome.
Something, getting trading and investing have been a couple of things I've been wanting to do for a while. And so I'm glad I got the opportunity to pick those things up.
Yeah, sounds fascinating.
Yeah,
all right.
It's fun. So, all right, guys. So this week's topic is the patient that you can never forget. I think we all have a story about one patient that we can never forget. It's always that one thing that you take along with you throughout your nursing career. And I find that it's the most challenging patients that I can never forget, patients who are just medically intensive or have a high acuity that also need that extra emotional support. Or sometimes it can be just like that walkie-talkie patient that gets discharged the next day. I find it's those two extremes. So I think the patient that I can never forget recently, about 2 weeks ago, I admitted an older gentleman to the COVID unit. And I could tell that he was pretty anxious about being COVID positive. And I was doing his admission database, getting his vitals, et cetera. And we talked for about 30 minutes. because that's typically how much time you need to make sure that the patient is stable, hook them up to cardiac monitoring, continuous pulse oximetry. You guys know the drill. So I could tell that he was extremely anxious about being alone in the hospital. He had been married to his wife for 50 plus years, and we just started talking. And I learned so much about him in that 30-minute time span. I just felt like really connected to him and really close to him. I told him my name, and he was like, "You're so easy to talk to." We talked about his love for vintage cars and his grandkids, and how he and his wife met, and that he went away in the Army for 2 years and then they reconnected when he came back. It was just like a lovely story. And I really enjoy talking to older patients. One of my specialties and certifications is geriatrics. So those 65 plus old patients always get to me, but it was just like the coolest experience talking to this man. And I told him about my love for late 80s Mercedes models and convertibles, and he actually just recently sold one of his vintage cars to this like car club in California. So I thought that was pretty cool. Anyways, he was COVID positive, but he was completely stable and got to be discharged the next day. So I was super happy that that COVID story had a happy ending and that he could get back to his wife, because he's not used to being away from her because they've been married for so long.
Yeah.
But that was just like something that really stuck with me. It's just nice to like really when you can take out the time to get to know your patients and you have those opportunities, just grab them while you can, because you never know how impactful you could be. I helped him to be less anxious. And then he got discharged the next day, and I also got the opportunity to just get to know a patient.
Chelsea, that's a wonderful story. You know what I love the most about it? Other than saying he was admitted to the COVID unit, you mentioned nothing medical at all. It was all about him and his family and his interests. And where it was intentional where I work in finding something out about the patient other than their diagnosis and making that connected to purpose. Why are we doing what we do? And it goes way beyond a diagnosis. So that's what I love about that story. That's fabulous.
Yeah, it was
He will
great.
never forget you. He will never forget you. I can guarantee that.
Yeah, he was like, "Don't you have another patient?" I was like, "No, it's okay. I can."
Oh,
the other nurses are covering for me while I'm admitting you. It's okay.
That's
so yeah,
great.
I had a ball talking to him. I love when I get the chance to do that.
That's great.
That is really cool, because you have those kinds of connections with your patients and those experiences that do stick with you, and they're not leaving you, but then you have the other kind of experience with a patient that also sticks with you, that medically critical incident. One of the patients that sticks with me, I look back on it and I can laugh now because I have been a nurse for so long, but at the time it was my first night shift after being off of orientation. And I was so...
Yikes.
Yeah. I felt so abandoned. All of the night shift nurses were at 5 patients, including the charge nurse. And so when we got the very last admit, it puts one nurse at 6. And the charge nurse gave that to me. She gave me the 6th patient. And I just remember thinking, why?
On
why
your first
would you?
night of orientation? Oh my gosh.
So I get the 6th patient and I'm doing okay. And I'm holding my own until I have a patient start going into respiratory distress. And I remember going to my charge nurse and telling her my patient is declining. And she's like, "What do you want me to do about it?" Which is still, I can laugh about it now. At the time, it was so scary and so frightening. And so I just remember paging the doctor, and this is before the land of rapid responses. And so it's like, you either wait till your patient is coding or you cross your fingers that the doctor's going to respond to your page. And those were the options. And I remember charting at the bedside. I was so worried about this patient. And finally the doctor came and we transferred the patient out. And when she rounded again in the morning, she told me I had done the right thing.
Oh,
you know what I mean? And so it was comforting that the doctor had told me I had done the right thing. But man, the charge nurse was so terrible. And one of my mentors worked in the morning. And when she asked me how my night went, I just started bawling. So I'm like, I don't know that I'll ever forget that patient. It still sticks with me. And it was my very first night shift.
You probably don't forget the charge nurse either, right?
She doesn't charge anymore. I'm still on the unit and she doesn't charge anymore.
I have a patient, and this was a recent patient within the last 3 weeks. So I had picked up an extra shift, and this patient was extremely nervous and anxious. And she had been there maybe 3 days, but the last 2 days previous to me coming, she was not getting out of bed. She didn't want to do PT. She didn't want to move. We met and we built a little rapport. She was still nervous. So throughout the day, she had to have some testing done and some other labs drawn. And every time I went in that room, which was probably 50% more than my other patients during that day. But we laughed, we clicked. And then one time I came in, I told you all before, I usually have my music on. And I noticed something, not just about this patient, but I noticed something about my older patients. When I have on music, it just puts them in a whole different mood. They seem to reminisce and remember their times, maybe growing up and however their childhood and maybe younger years were. But the music really makes a connection with them. So I have on music and I'm going in the room singing and dancing, and she starts moving her foot. And then she starts tapping. And then she reaches for my hand and she starts crying. And I'm asking, oh my gosh, what's wrong? She said, oh my gosh, it's just the music. It just sounds good. And throughout the rest of the day, to her great credit, and she got up. She allowed us to get her up. And move her to the commode instead of just using the bedpan. And I had also taught her the peace symbol. So when she started feeling herself getting anxious, just really anxious for no reason, we put up the peace sign. So she did it to me, and she just put it up herself and said, I'm learning, I'm listening to you, and I'm going to start using this because it's helping me to just relax myself. The rest of the day, we laughed, we talked, she ate, she let us move her, she danced a little, she sang. And when I was leaving for the day, I went to tell her goodbye, that I was leaving. And she said, you're leaving? And I said, yeah. And she said, and she started crying. And she said, don't go. And I said, oh my gosh, I have to go. I'm sorry. She said, well, you coming back? I said, no, I won't be back for a couple of days, and you probably will be gone by then. But she was crying, so I had to stay a little bit longer to comfort her. But I thought about that patient, and not so much what I had done, but that she was willing to even trust whatever the process was that we both were learning throughout that day about her. It was just a beautiful day. It was just a natural, organic type of experience.
That sounds really awesome.
Powerful story right there. Getting to do what you're supposed to do, be able to make a connection, sit and talk, and using the powerful medium of music. That's amazing. That really is.
And finding that level to connect on and really bond over.
So I got a couple of stories to share from my time when I was a renal transplant nurse, which is still surgical, but a little more specialized. But anyway, the world of transplantation is a wonderful world for the most part, because most of our patients, of course, have been on dialysis, and they are that classic renal patient. When they say to know them is to love them, that's really true. They're the complete package of chronic illness, depression, and never thinking they're ever going to feel well again. So it is a wonderful thing to send someone off to receive a kidney, and they come back post-operatively, and they literally are like new people. The second it perfuses, urine is produced, and the patient just looks a different skin tone, and their whole demeanor is just like a complete 360. It's amazing. It really is. But along with transplantation, of course, is the issue about rejection. And so we dose these people up on steroids, but they can mess you up big time. They really can. And I had the privilege of taking care of the first patient in the state that I was living who got a simultaneous kidney pancreas transplant. The surgery went well, but the steroids made this guy absolutely crazy. And I walked into the room one day, and the way the room was set up was the heating and air unit was on the floor, but high enough that you could sit on it in front of the window. And I walked into the room and I called his name and I couldn't find him. So there were drapes on this window unit, and I looked around the room, looked in the bathroom. By the time I came out of the bathroom, this poor guy leapt from behind the drapes. Not a stitch of clothing on. He ran over to the corner of the room where the nightstand was. He picked up the nightstand. He hurled the nightstand towards me. I'm ducking and covering, and this poor guy takes off. And of course, we called security. There was a big hullabaloo, and it took us a little while to chase him down and capture him and put a gown on him. And the poor guy had no recollection of anything. But I tell this story when I teach my Med Surg Review courses because this is a great reaction, not a good reaction, to prednisone and what we know as prednisone-induced psychosis. For every good thing that a drug does, you've also got the side effects as well. So I never forgot him along the way. And he comes up every time I do a Med Surg Review course because it's just a great example of what high-dose steroids can do and the importance of tapering those steroids to the lowest therapeutic dose. It's not a very compassionate story, is it? But it's one that stayed with me for many years.
Very compassionate. You guys found him. You put the gown on him.
We did. That's right. Yeah.
Very compassionate.
We didn't take the little bitty bath towel that they provide. We took a big gown and covered the poor guy up.
It's interesting that we're talking about these stories. And what I love, like you said, Caroline, they're personal. They are at the heart of the patient, of who they are, not just focusing and making them a medical diagnosis.
Right.
And I think this topic is a lesson for many nurses across the country, many of our listeners, in that maybe sometimes we need to step back as the professionals, as the caregivers, to say, how can we just care for them as who they are? What personal needs can we meet? Not necessarily a medication or an intervention, but just meeting them as people.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, you made me think of another one, another transplant story. The patient was admitted, I think, to rule out rejection, as I recall, and he had a massive heart attack. He literally just dropped dead. It was just shocking and it was awful. And we called the code and we tried to resuscitate, and it was his time. And so we were all devastated because we'd gotten to know this patient, and you get to know them and you get to know their family. His wife came to visit him, and literally it was like a sixth sense. She arrived minutes after he'd passed away, and we hadn't even had a chance to make a phone call. And we were all just devastated. And she just couldn't process what was going on. And all she kept saying was, no, you're wrong. We're going fishing this weekend. You're wrong. He couldn't possibly have passed it. We're going fishing. And that's all she could think about. It was just, it was heartbreaking. And none of us had a second to process the story. Yeah, along with the funny stories, there are also those devastatingly heartbreaking stories that you don't forget about those.
So there was one morning at the hospital, we had surveyors in the hospital. We had a code pink called. By the time, I would say maybe 10:30 in the morning rolled around, the main part of the hospital was pretty slow and abandoned. Everyone had been out and about. The code pink was for a teenager. So they'd been looking for this teenager who wandered off campus. And so I was a part of the survey group. We were being surveyed. This was when I was the educator for our rehab hospital. And I had been asked if I would run down to the cafeteria for something for the surveyors. So I'm walking out of the cafeteria, which opens up into a large atrium. And I watched a gentleman fall off the chairs and just face plant onto the floor. And so I run over to him. It was so strange. There's nobody in the atrium, which is really odd. And so I roll him over and I'm sternal rubbing him and I'm getting him to take some pretty agonal breaths. And so I'm searching for a pulse and I'm second guessing myself when I'm trying to find the pulse. When I lifted his shirt, he had a scar from a transplant, clamshell scar. And so I was worried that if I started CPR on this person, that I would cause more harm. And every time my sternal rubbed him, I got him to take this breath, even if it was agonal. I got him to take a breath. And so I felt like I was buying time. But eventually I started CPR. It felt like an eternity. It was probably 20 seconds instead of 10. But I was walking with a coworker. And so as we were running over, I had given the coworker my phone and said, you need to call an outpatient arrest. So as I'm working on the patient, nobody had come. Like nobody was coming. And so I just kept going. I had no resources, had no vital sign machines, no IVs being placed, nothing. It was literally like the weirdest scenario I'd ever been in. It's so weird to be in the facility where I've worked my entire career and be in the one place where I had no resources for this exact situation. Luckily, one of our service line directors for critical care found me. She walked by, and all I know is I look up and I hear they're coding somebody in the atrium and nobody is here. You need to get everybody down here. And then she hung up the phone, she got on her knees, and she relieved me from compressions so that I could go do airway. And, then every single code team in the hospital show up, outpatient, inpatient, rapid response teams, code blue teams, like everybody shows up and I work my way out of the scene because I'm like, all right, well, my work here's done. What's interesting about that is I first found out from a colleague of mine in the education department who was on the CPR committee. The first thing they told me was that the patient lived. When they got him to the emergency room, they were able to put him on ECMO. He had thrown a PE. And because I had given good quality CPR, he qualified to be put on ECMO and he lived. And then the next thing I found out about a year later, as I was telling this story to my group of educators that I mentor, one of the educators asked me the date. And when I told him when it was, he said, that was my dad. That was a really cool experience.
Wow.
Wow. That's quite a story. Oh my goodness.
Talk about coming full circle.
Yeah. So there's another patient I'll never forget.
That's awesome, Alissa.
Wow, Alissa, that was a very powerful story. That was probably very hard to tell that story again. You made me think of a situation, and I don't remember the specifics, except it was someone that had coded right by one of the entrances to the hospital that was a badge access entrance. They were on the outside and couldn't get in. And because it was around the back, there were no phones or anything to alert the hospital to this emergency. But as I recall, obviously someone saw them and immediately opened the door and got the patient into the emergency room. But as a result of that, we had an emergency code that could override any of those doors that were locked. And that code was only given to a handful of people, obviously, but I think this guy lived as well. But again, what feels like forever in trying to get into the door was obviously terrifying for them. So out of these tragic situations, hopefully we can turn it around and make something good out of it. And you sharing that story made me think about that situation.
I've participated in a lot of Code Blues on the unit with my team, all my resources, all of my equipment. That was the first time that I had ever been completely removed from all of that. And I think that was the hardest part. And the way I tell the story, it completely happened that way. I just like to omit the part where when I make my way out of the scene, I actually went to my office and cried from like the adrenaline rush and the fears that I had, because I still feared. I had no resources. I didn't have any help. And I coded somebody in the atrium and I had no idea what the outcome was. And so there's still a fear that I had hurt this patient in some way. And so finding out that not only did this patient survive because of my actions, but then finding out that somebody that I had a working relationship with actually benefited from my actions because that was a loved one. Like, such an amazing feeling to know that I've created it or contributed to that situation.
Indeed. Competency in action. You should feel very proud of your actions there. You really should, though. You really should.
All right, guys, we're at the end of this week's episode. I wanted to tell you guys about a new opportunity that we are using to share our Med Surg moment stories. The Academy of Medical Surgical Nurses is now offering the Med Surg Stories video series. If you have a story that you want to share that stuck with you throughout your nursing career, please send us an email at amsnpod@amsn.org. Again, that's amsnpod@amsn.org. All of the co-hosts so far have participated in this cool project. It's just a great way to leave your staple on med-surg nursing. So I would love for all of you guys to participate.
We look forward to connecting with you on the next episode of Med Surg Moments, the AMSN podcast. In the meantime, we want to hear from you. Send us your questions, topic ideas, and feedback to amsnpod@amsn.org. That's amsnpod@amsn.org.
We'd also like to remind you to become a member of AMSN or renew your membership at www.amsn.org. You receive lots of cool benefits and perks, such as discounted pricing on the annual convention and continuing education.
We encourage you to help us spread the word and subscribe to the Med Surg Moments podcast via your smartphone podcast app to receive notifications of future episodes. Please be sure to leave us a review and recommend Med Surg Moments wherever you get your podcasts to help us reach even more listeners.
We invite you to join the conversation by sharing your ideas and questions on AMSN's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter pages. And don't forget to add #MedSurgMoments to your posts. Simply enter AMSN in the search field on any of these social media platforms to connect with us.
The content within the Med Surg Moments podcast represents the views, thoughts, and opinions of the co-hosts and may not necessarily reflect the views, thoughts, and opinions of the Academy of Medical Surgical Nurses.
Until next time, I'm Evie.
I'm Chelsea.
And Alissa. And always remember, Med Surg Moments is a moment in our lives, a moment in our med surg careers that makes a huge difference.